Shift Happens podcast.
Welcome to the Shift Happens podcast, where we explore the latest trends and technologies transforming the future of work. Today, we have a special guest, Javier Inclán, Assistant Inspector General for Management and CIO of the U.S. National Science Foundation Office of the Inspector General. Today, Javier shares his insights on digital transformation in the federal government, the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and the potential of Gen AI in enhancing public service. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome back to another awesome episode of Shift Happens podcast. And today I'm so excited to essentially reconnect with a friend who's been in the industry, an awesome public servant, to the show, and we're going to have lots of great conversations. So Javier, great to see you again, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Dux. Appreciate it. Great to be here, and thank you for the invitation. It's good to see you.
So before we get going with our conversation, I always ask our guests the very first thing as to what song resonates with you the most as you think about disruption, change, and transformation.
Yeah, so it's Wind of Change by the Scorpions. It was, I believe, released in 1991. It was right before the fall of the Soviet Union. Basically, the band was in Moscow, and they just saw the energy that eventually led up to the tearing down of the Soviet Union and the communist regime in that area. And I was 19 years old when that song came out, and I didn't know anything else but the Soviet Union, right? I mean, my entire life was about that. My dad was Cuban, so he fled a communist country. So that was something that, I really was interested in knowing more about, and just hearing that song and the way there was this inspirational tone to it, some hope about change, that ended up being clearly, transformational change at that time. So that's the first song that I thought of when asked a question.
Songs are, to me, it's something like food, right? It's a moment in time where you are, what's happening in the world, and then it just sticks, right? And I had to check out this song, and I thought it was very powerful because I think shortly after you also served in the military.
My first 5 years in the federal government, I worked as a civilian with the Army. Yes, supporting the warfighter.
Got it. So maybe that's why I thought you served.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, that time was a big moment for the world, right? It changed history forever. And I thought about when I was listening to it, I looked at the lyrics. It's a powerful anthem because it talks about how you embrace change and transformation despite what's going on. In some ways, some people may think, oh, this is a difficult time, a terrible time, but the after effects of it, right? And where people came together, I think that's what the other thing the song talks about is there needs to be unity and everybody has to come together. And it's a reminder that strength comes from not just one, but a group.
Absolutely. And just the amount of hope that I got out of that song. And to your point about food, music to me also, not only moment in time, but it's that memory, right? I hear the song and I go back to 1991, 1992, right? I immediately get transported back, and regardless of whether it was 30 plus years ago, it's just an incredible and powerful way of remembering that time. Yeah.
And it stirs feelings and emotions, right? Like you hear a song, oh, that was from my dance, from my prom or homecoming. Well, Javier, I've known you since for a while now, and the moment I met you, you're a public servant, and you're continuing to be a public servant and paying it forward and mentoring other government leaders. So maybe to our listeners, can you explain what the role of the Office of Inspector General is, and how does it provide oversight to the U.S. National Science Foundation?
Sure. Great question. So the Office of Inspector General here is relatively new in comparison to NSF. So NSF was established in 1950. The OIG at NSF was established in 1989. as an independent oversight organization. Basically, there's two silos of that. There's an Office of Audits, Inspections, and Evaluations, and there's an Office of Investigations. And pretty much it's both providing oversight of internal NSF operations, but also the awardee community external, right? So for the listeners that don't know, NSF, for the most part, issues grants to academics and other organizations. And, it's federal money, and that needs to be watched. And NSF does a really nice job of doing that. However, there's a law that says that there has to be an IG now since 1989. And that's what our folks do is, just keep an eye on that, make sure that they're monitoring, make sure that there's no, waste, fraud, or abuse, that there's an efficient use of federal funding, things of that nature, and that there's no impropriety, whether it's internal by NSF employees or external.
And if you're listening to podcasts today, in some ways you have to thank the NSF because NSF was instrumental in helping the internet to come to life, right? As far as I recall.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was NSF-net at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, NSF-net, that's right, because the grant came from the NSF, and I think the experiment with University of California, Berkeley, the first connection was made, so it was fascinating. ARPANET, NSF-net, and then now the internet.
Yeah, exactly right.
So part of your career, you've been in technology and helping shepherd government agencies maximize and utilize technologies. How has your experience been in all these different agencies shape your thinking and approach with embracing digital transformation? And certainly we'll talk about AI in a second. And how do you see the evolution of technology supported our government?
Yeah, great question. So I want to go to what I call, there's a lot of different versions of diversity. We talk about race, ethnicity, gender, other things. And I also add to that diversity of agency, meaning, have you worked at different organizations? Because that really frames and widens folks' aperture just by default. I've been in small organizations, I've been in large organizations, and in a vast majority of my roles in the federal government, they've been customer service focused. And I have seen digital transformation from the lens of providing that customer service. Regardless of what I was doing, at any given agency, there was an opportunity to change, to improve service, to make things more efficient, right? Even 10 years ago, which is much different than it is now, as you mentioned, with artificial intelligence. I've used that experience to build, the next, role that I had, to inform the next role that I had, and to be able to have some real intelligent conversations with the true subject matter expert, right? Experts, the folk that work with me and for me, in order to say, what else, can we do? What's next? What's the art of the possible? And I don't think I would be as interested or as forward thinking as I am today if it wasn't for that diversity of aperture, diversity of agency.
Do you think the view of transformation, in your case, thinking about how do you better serve customers through technology, is different in the private industry? Because there's this stereotype, right, where private organizations are doing digital transformation so they can be more productive, make money, save money, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, there's this view that government's always behind with technology, which I don't agree with, because in some cases, like the internet, because of the government, we have the internet. So what's your take on that with the perspective of digital transformation, private organizations versus public, and some of the maybe wrong stereotypes out there?
No, absolutely. And I agree with you. I don't think we're behind. I think there are well-intended and necessary regulations that require the government to take certain steps before implementing a new, technology. To be fair, if I started a company, after I retired, I could probably do whatever I wanted, as long as it wasn't illegal or unethical or moral, at least illegal, right? In the government, there are certain things you have to follow. There's compliance. There's software that can't be implemented because it's not FedRAMP compliant or things like that. So I think I have met some amazing technical minds in the federal government, people that have been public servants for most of their careers. We are now recruiting the best and the brightest. I could tell you that at the NSF OIG last year, we recruited two folks from the Scholarship for Service program that's funded by NSF, coincidentally. And they are just, it's amazing how advanced they are in their knowledge. It's a pretty incredible thing to see what the art of the possible is from that perspective. And I don't think it's much different. Maybe it's at a grander scale in the private sector. There's more money. Let's face it, there's more money in certain instances in the private sector. So we have some constraints, budgetary, human capital resources, regulations that are, to me, very necessary to make sure that we're protecting our data and protecting our information. You hear or read about stories all the time about people trying to hack government entities and trying to get into their system. So I think we're on the cutting edge. It's just a matter of the timing and how we overcome those challenges that are necessary, yet challenges nonetheless.
Absolutely. And speaking of like what you brought up, right? Because we're seeing this too, where there's this, which is really good. There's this movement of people wanting to serve more. And we see a lot of technologists, especially in the recent year, from the um, uh, things that have happened in the private sector, where jobs weren't as lucrative as before. But a lot of technologies are going back wanting to serve in their best capacity as technologists.
Absolutely. And, look, I always say in the federal government, you're probably not going to get rich by definition. But if you work hard and you stick with it, you're going to do well. But there's this inkling to do good and this public service that sometimes is as motivating, if not more motivating, than just a financial, the end of the day, the financial component. And I will say that there is a certain confidence that if you do the right thing and work hard, you're going to have a job. And you're going to be able to retire from the government, where in the private sector, you may make more money up front, but there's always that at-will piece that could be considered something as a negative, regardless of what the number is.
Absolutely. There's that sense of stability, right? And then obviously the service you're providing. And so I'm sure everybody's looking at the NSF website now, or OIG, or I'm sure the career side of the government. If I'm sure there's tons of openings too. Um, Speaking of transformation, and earlier you mentioned about your view on the diversity and having that aperture on how we can better serve. What are some specific initiatives you've been involved with, specifically in NSF, for example, NSF OIG, to improve this customer service or operations, leveraging technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very proud to say that a couple of months into my tenure here at the OIG, I continue something that had already been talked about and started, and it was actually establishing an official DEIA council within the NSF OIG. It is employee led, comprised of folks from all of our different offices across the OIG. They created a DEIA strategic plan for the NSF OIG. They created action plan based on those strategic initiatives. And it's something I'm very proud of because people are understanding why we're doing this and why it's important from a diversity of thought perspective. We all know, and the science bears out, that, the best ideas come from diverse teams. So I'm very proud of that. I personally took the initiative, and the Inspector General, Allison Lerner, is a big proponent and supporter of this initiative. When we hired two executives over the last year and a half, I actually took the packages and manually redacted some information, names, addresses, and schools, to be specific. And I did that to try to mitigate some of potential unconscious bias that may occur during the interview and rating and ranking process. And the external panel that reviewed both of those were very complimentary of that, because they felt, although they don't believe they have bias, if it's unconscious, you don't know you have it by definition. And they were just very pleased that I took the time and the effort to actually do that. We also make sure that we have diverse interview panels from a variety of perspectives, not just, again, race, gender, ethnicity, but also background. If we're hiring, X, it doesn't have to be all X people that are interviewing, because there's a different perspective if you had somebody from another office. In the Office of Management, I always make sure that we have folks from our customer base. So we have somebody from either the Office of Audit, Inspection Evaluations, or Office of Investigations, or both, when we're hiring somebody in the Office of Management, because we're providing service to those folks. And I want to make sure that there's buy-in from that perspective. And then the last thing I want to say is that we are very open to workplace flexibilities. Our inspector general has been very supportive of telework, of remote work, having a real strong hybrid work environment. And I think that allows us to do a lot of things, hire the best and the brightest, have that diversity of geography, right? Because depending on where you are from the country, you may have a different experience that informs decision making. Plus, there's the accessibility piece. And if there's an opportunity to hire somebody that, physically can't come into an office, but they're the best in their field, why not have the opportunity to give them that chance?
So that's awesome. And sounds like to make that work, the technology infrastructure is in place to support all that, right?
Absolutely. That's part two. So our IT team is bar none. It's 5 folks, director, 2 supervisors, and the 2 individuals I mentioned earlier. And they are just so dedicated to customer service, to what's the next best thing. They want to learn. We have the infrastructure in place in concert with NSF proper. We use Microsoft Teams mostly. We have the capability to have a lot of our documentation are digitized. We just launched our new investigative case management system, which is built on the Appian platform. So we're really excited about that. A large piece of our work is portable, and that allows for that type of hybrid posture that we're so supportive of in our organization.
So now that you have the technology in place and this mindset of being diverse, having the DEI framework, have you seen the impact, and how do you measure this on day-to-day employee work and morale and productivity?
Yeah, so I'm proud to say that every year the federal government launches something through the Office of Personnel Management known as the FEVS, or the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. So the latest results we have are 2023 and 2024, I believe, are coming out in November. But I'm proud to say that after the 2023 results, we scored a 91 in our overall DEIA index score. That to me is amazing. It is, one of the higher scores across the federal government subcomponents. And I'm really proud of that because it demonstrates that, people really understand the importance of DEI and how we're doing it. And by the way, surveys are only as much as, what the percentage is. Well, 90% of our employees submitted responses to that survey. So it's not like 10% or 15%, 90% of our office, and we scored a 91 on our DEIA index. In addition to that, we've done some pulse surveys for DEIA, and we have similar results. We did at our last 2 retreats ago in Louisville, Kentucky, last year in 2023. We actually had a facilitator conduct a fearless organization scan, which measures psychological safety and allows us to have those conversations about what we're doing well, what we could do better in, there is no real obstacle to speak up in our office. And, that comes from the top. Our inspector general is very open to that. So all of those things. And in addition, let me just add that we have been conducting exit interviews since 2022. And all of the interviews have been about, we're going to miss the people. We're actually leaving, because we're running towards something as opposed to running away from something. For the most part, there's always challenges and that's fine. But for the most part, I think people do not leave here because they're miserable or anything like that. It's just different opportunities or different situations or circumstances that require them, to move to a different agency, to retire, or to go to to a different sector.
That's awesome. And like you said, that's very impressive, especially it's one of those things, right, where we all know it's very important, regardless if it's in the public sector field or private sector. In some ways, it's still hard to track and measure. And as such, some organizations have a hard time investing in it and making sure that this is part of our DNA. But it sounds like what you all have done is it's now business as usual and not just this little special program on the side as an afterthought.
Yeah, I say, we're getting there. I always say it's a journey, not a destination, right? And we're always looking to improve and build on and get people's input on it. We actually are just rotating out some members of that DEIA council just to get those fresh perspectives. People are excited. We just had 4 new colleagues sign up for the council this week. So I'm excited about what's to come because I really do believe that people are invested in this. To your point, we're trying to inculcate this into the fabric of our organization, our day-to-day operations, as opposed to just having, something as a check the box exercise.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, something I just thought of, because you mentioned something earlier about bias, right? Where you redacted the resumes. With Gen AI, while it's great, what kind of implications do you see around bias or from a DIA perspective? Because it relies on data, and we know that a lot of the existing data are biased.
And that's exactly it. I couldn't have said it better myself. If you're going to simplify it, right? It's about where is that, how is that platform learning? Where is it getting that information from? And is that, it's almost like the old spreadsheet adage of garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the data that's being pulled into the, the model is biased inherently, then, you probably have a good chance of that being a biased model altogether. There's also some I don't want to say fear, but some caution on my part regarding, to a similar extent, like say building a job announcement, right? Something that I learned a couple of years ago, which was had never thought about it. Some people, if you say, "Hey, looking for an energetic, excited, employee to do this," it could be ageist, right? Because it could be some folks that are more mature in life. They may think, "Oh, they're not looking for somebody that's 53 like I am." They may be looking for, young whippersnapper that's 23 or 24 because they want them to be energetic and there's a connotation between age and level of energy, right? Good, bad, or indifferent or perceived or not. And we all know that perception is reality to folks. So that's something that we have in the back of our minds to make sure that, it's almost a trust but verify. Even if we use Gen AI at some point to develop these things, there always has to be a quality control. I think it's SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, that said, AI plus HI or human intelligence equals success, right? And that's true. It's just going to happen. And the other thing is there's also a people bias, right? Because some people have been in the federal government a long time. They haven't been in school for a while, if at all, right? And now there's this fear of, oh, artificial intelligence is going to, take my job. And they may feel biased by that because they haven't had the opportunity. So what we're saying here is, hey, look, we'll give you every opportunity to upskill and reskill because AI is not going to take human jobs. Humans with AI skills are going to take human jobs.
That's exactly what it is, right? I think we're still in the wild, wild west. AI has been around forever, but because thanks to Gen AI, now it's surfaced. Just like I think about the internet. The internet started in the late 60s, but because of the World Wide Web, it exploded, right? So same thing with AI. With Gen AI, AI is now, exploded. But at the same time, we're still in the wild, wild west where either everybody's overly optimistic or there's all these naysayers. We haven't found that middle ground yet where it's standardized, right? I think that's where we're trying to get to. And I think it requires a lot of us, like trailblazers, to experiment, to learn, to see what works, but be very cautious about it too. Hence, I like what Microsoft calls it co-pilot. It's a reminder that you can't leave it alone, right? Like it does your first draft, and then you still have to do your own work and due diligence.
Exactly right. And I tell you what, for somebody who in my career, I admit, and I'll be vulnerable here, I've looked at a blank screen sometimes and I'm like, man, how do I get that first word out there? And to be able to use, one of these Gen AI models to, to generate something, even if it's just a draft or something to, bomb it on the paper or on the screen. And then you could massage a little bit. I always say it's one of my professors in school said, what she said, oh, edit drunk, write drunk, edit sober. So the right drunk is the Gen AI and the edit sober is the human going in there and making sure that there is no bias and that it makes sense. We just real quick, we had somebody come in to facilitate a session on AI, and they were saying how an attorney was arguing a case and submitted his briefs, and one of the law clerks caught it, and it was basically the wrong citation, or it was a case that never existed, or it was the wrong premise for it, and the judge reprimanded the attorney because they didn't do their job. They just tried to do something quick, and they were using whatever Gen AI platform they were using, and it just wasn't the correct citation. Yeah.
That's why I commend. For example, so my son's going to university, and I was speaking with somebody yesterday. He was saying, there's a professor and actually told the students, go write your paper with AI. But as soon as AI writes it, fact check it and see how many errors there are. Right. So it's not like they're preventing, because there's a school of thought in schools like, no, no, no AI, block AI. But what this teacher did is really made the students realize that while it's good, you still have to take care of it, review it, fact check it, and edit it, right?
Well, and hopefully the professor told them that they need to cite the fact that they used AI to.
Exactly, exactly. Do you have Copilot, by the way, or have you used it?
I have not.
Okay. So when you get it, it's just a matter of time. One of the cool things I've done recently, so we use Copilot. Uh, I wanted to see how far I can take it, and with Copilot, it looks at the Microsoft tenant, it looks at all my stuff, right? So I said, hey, look at all my emails, my Teams meetings, my documents, and chats in the last 3 years. Look at everything. And then use this information to figure out what kind of leader I am and tell me what my weaknesses are and strengths are, and give me a plan the next 6 months to be a better leader to my direct reports. It's insane.
Wow. Was it accurate?
It's pretty close.
Pretty accurate. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it says like, "Hey, you can do a better job in delegating, or you can be more consistent with your one-on-ones. And here's a plan that I recommend for you." Right? But like you said, it's a first draft. If I were to do it, I would. I wouldn't have come up with that. Right? So that's where I see the value too. Beyond, sure, the day-to-day stuff. Write an email, help me write a proposal or something. But this, because it has access to all previous data, then it can help me figure things out, which now, wow, you're really my co-pilot, right? What do you think the opportunities are for Gen AI in at NFG OIG or NSF OIG? Anything you're ideating now with your team or thinking about?
Yeah, we're actually talking to NSF now about the potential of building a chatbot based on Gen AI. There's a lot of information that could be sought out that we're just taking a lot of human capital time to respond to, and it's the same old question because we're answering it to different employees or different colleagues. So that's one thing. I mentioned it before, job announcements, potentially position descriptions, maybe even appraisals, right? Performance appraisals, where it's always difficult to come up with the right words. But if you use that as your first draft, as you mentioned before, that's probably going to provide a lot of assistance. The one thing that I'm looking for internally is, when you hear of Gen AI and artificial intelligence in general, people are looking at the big picture. What are those huge transformational changes for the United States government? I want Gen AI to help my colleagues, that person down the hallway that needs help, right? Right, day to day. I mean, if they could save an hour a week, 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week, by using this, what are those things that we could use it for? Man, that would be revolutionary, because at some point it would be, okay, we may not even need to add that additional intern or that additional person that we're going to hire to do this. And we could rededicate that fund or those funds to, hire an auditor or an investigator or an attorney or whatever the case may be, while still executing our job and probably more efficient. Because let's face it, the more this learns and the more we're able to use it, the better it's going to be for our day-to-day business.
100%. Another cool thing is when you said chatbot, it made me remember something. A few weeks ago, I was talking to a customer, a government agency. They're about to deploy a new hire agent. So it's kind of a chatbot, but instead of just waiting for somebody to interact with this chatbot, it's proactive. So for example, they have new hires. On the second day of the new hire on Teams, it will say, "Hey Javier, how's your second day here at OIG? Um, I noticed you haven't filled out this form yet. Did you need help, right? That's pretty cool.
That's it. That nailed it. Nailed it. I mean, that would save not only save time, but not people don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Oh, Ducks just started. It's Tuesday. What I have to send them that email. No, that should be automatic.
That's right. In there's essentially it's an agent monitoring because everything's connected anyway, right? Every new hire, the workflow is well defined already. There's a process already. So just making sure did the person do this or that? If not, right? So and then this would alleviate a lot of the HR and people folks because as we all know, everybody's always short staffed anyway. So those little things, daily, day in, day out things, I fully agree with you. We don't have to solve, you know, how to prevent nuclear weapons from going out with AI, but this day-to-day thing is very important.
Agreed. Agreed.
So, with your peers in the industry, in the federal government, are you seeing the maturity and adoption of these new technologies to really help, meet the mission of the agencies are happening? Are people more open to new technologies just to make sure that, maximize the human capital they have, but at the same time meeting the goals that set for them for the agencies?
Yeah, I don't think anybody has mastered that. I think we are very, very mature compared to where we were, a year ago or 2 years ago. There's individual challenges as well, right? We talked about resources, both financial and human capital. There's other challenges of, not getting the buy-in from leadership, right? Not getting the approval. That fear of what this is going to do to my organization, right? And maybe slow rolling some things. I've heard folks say, look, I'm ready to launch, but we're just not, we haven't convinced leadership yet. So I think it's both internal and external factors, right? I mentioned before about the regulatory, process that we have to go through to make sure that everything is safe and secure, which is absolutely necessary. And then you have the regular challenges of human capital and finance, but then there's also this, internal, hey, can we just delay this a year? I'm retiring. I don't want to deal with this, right? And then even on the ground, folks that, as I mentioned before, they're just scared of what that implementation means for their jobs, right? And I think we need to explain that better, right? I'm not going to say that it's short-sighted because you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't explain it to them, shame on you, right? So I think we need to do a better job from a leadership perspective to, bring that technical, piece into the layman's term of this is how it could help you, right? I always struggle with generating use cases and I try to tell folks, look, I'm not the subject matter expert in what you do. You need to tell me what you think a good use case is. Right. And that's how the conversation starts. But I think overall, I think there's some really cool stuff out there. And I do wish that the federal enterprise would be even more open and more intentional about sharing promising practices. I think while we read things in the news or talking to you, I heard that an agency is doing X. Is there a better way to communicate that to both technical and non-technical groups of people?
That's right. Because you're right. People don't know what they don't know. But then once they start hearing these use cases, it spurs ideas, right? Oh, I could do that. Or what about this, right?
Correct. Exactly right.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.
Javier, it's been a great conversation. It's always good to catch up. But before we wrap up, for our listeners, what are the 1, 2, 3 tips would you offer to leaders looking to embrace technology to help forward their organization, and at the same time, making sure that they don't forget the people that they serve?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So number one is make sure what you're doing is ethical. There's a lot of things out there that, you may go down a slippery slope and it gets to a point where you may need to backtrack because it got to a point where it's just not the right thing to do. I would say listen to the subject matter experts, right? I have folks on my team that know this 5,000 times better than I do. And I want to make sure that I get their perspective and get their suggestions and roll out a plan that makes sense for them, being that they're the ones that are going to be rolling it out on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, make sure that we get buy-in, right? Let's communicate before we launch something and then try to catch people up. Let's get that buy-in up front, explain to them what we're trying to do as leaders, give them the why and how it's not going to negatively impact them. And if it is, or if they think it is, how we're going to help them get through that so that they're successful in their current and in future jobs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Javier, if people want to learn more about you and connect with you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always good. You and I catch up on LinkedIn a lot. I'm at JINCLAN at nsf.gov, and anybody has any ideas that they want to share with me, or they want to ask any questions or pick my brain, by all means, I'm more than happy to do that.
Awesome. And again, I have to tell everyone, Javier's the most open person, willing to share, wanting to help. So amazing human being. Again, thank you so much, Javier, for your time.
Thank you, Dux. I appreciate it. Great seeing you.
Shift Happens Podcast.
Thanks for listening. In this episode, we discuss Javier's journey in the federal government, the role of the Office of Inspector General for the National Science Foundation, and the impact of DEIA in Gen AI on improving operations and customer service. Javier emphasized the importance of ethical considerations and listening to subject matter experts when embracing new technologies. Until the next time.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.